Knock, knock. Wow, I didn't know you could yodel. A little old lady. Who's there? Who? Yeah, so that was a joke. And if you don't get it, that's totally on me. That was a complete flop. And it's because I told it totally out of order. I led with the punchline, and then I let all of the rest of the joke just kind of fall away. And might seem a little strange for somebody to do that, but interestingly enough, this is something that we do quite often when it comes to storytelling. And when I say storytelling, I mean it could be anything from pitching an important client to sharing what our workday was like with our spouse. Storytelling is something that we do every day, whether we're thinking about it or not. And one of the traps that I think we fall into quite regularly is very similar to what I did with that joke. We fail to recognize that the order matters, that the structure is really important, and that if you just kind of jumble up the order of things and expect the audience to just kind of follow along, chances are they're more likely to fall flat. Now, this meme might look familiar to you. This made the rounds on social media a couple of years ago, and it was fantastic. I think it really took off because it's so relatable, right? We all want to be that storyteller that can just draw that straight line from point A to point B, and the audience just feels this great sense of clarity. We know what we're talking about. We'd all love to think that we are that storyteller, and yet most of us meander around. And I think that a big reason that we do this is because we want to give people context. We think that having maximum backstory is going to help. And it is true to a certain extent, because context is important for storytelling. But oftentimes we go too far. And we give the audience way more information than they need in order to actually understand where the story is meant to go. And I think what that comes down to is really assessing what the audience needs to hear. It's hard enough to structure a story based on what we want to say. But it's a whole other ball of wax to then also consider what others need to be hearing too. And so I like to think of it as though it's a Venn diagram, where on one end we have what we want to say, on the other end we have what the audience needs to hear, and then the overlap is this sweet spot that I refer to as structure. And that structure in the middle gives us the opportunity to address both. I think it's just so important for being able to express our ideas, not just clearly, but in a way that emotionally resonates. And because I think that we can have so much more impact with our storytelling and beyond if we can just do that better. And so it really means a lot to me to be here today. And before we go into all of that structure stuff, I would really like to take a moment just to visit why this means so much to me. Both the storytelling part, but also just being here with you today, because you have no idea. This means so much to me. And it all started kind of a long time ago. There was a very pivotal moment in my life when I realized that I had to take a certain kind of path. And it really all started with what I consider to be the perfectly blissful childhood. I had the kind of childhood I wish for all children to have. Loving parents, a community, a safe place with friends and family, and feeling supported. And I really felt like the world was my oyster. I was raised to believe that I could achieve the things that meant something to me as long as I believed enough and worked hard. And my parents were so good. And my dad, he was kind of bad cop in the sense that he was a little critical. I realize now in hindsight that it was a very loving thing he was doing. He just had really high expectations for me. But Sometimes it made me feel a little smaller than I think he intended to make me feel. But then my mom, she was good cop. And so whenever I was all like, Dad did it again, she was ready to give me a hug and make me feel just that unconditional love that you want for all children to have. And it was fantastic. In fact, my mom was my best friend. We told each other everything. It was awesome. But you can probably see where this is going, because it wasn't awesome forever. There was a moment where everything got turned upside down. And what I thought was my reality turned out to be completely different. And the people that I trusted most turned out to be untrustworthy. The safety that I had felt my whole life, I didn't feel anymore. And there was betrayal, there was pain, and eventually there was death. And I lost my mom when I was 14. It was very sudden, and it was not under good circumstances. And in that moment, I had a really important decision to make. I could become jaded and untrusting and just move forward with my life with a chip on my shoulder, and that would be that. And probably justified. At least I could justify it. Or I could go and spend the rest of my life trying to achieve something bigger and better. And I don't know what it was. It was probably the really, really good foundation that I had been raised with up until that point. It had given me the strength to decide, nope, this is not going to crumble me. Instead, I'm going to use this as an opportunity for growth, not just for myself and personal growth, but I want to try to fix things, because this was a really rude awakening for me. I thought that the world was perfect. My parents had sheltered me from a lot. And then all of a sudden it was just all raw. And so I didn't want to just grow myself, but I was starting to see some problems, challenges in the world in general that I thought needed fixing. And I didn't know how I was going to do it, but somewhere along the way I discovered storytelling. And I really do believe that storytelling is one of the best, most efficient vehicles for social change that exists. Because it's all about connecting people with ideas and making them feel and understand, and about connecting one another. And so I do really feel like that is part of the answer for me. But one thing that I struggled with, and quite honestly I still do, is just the fact that I'm just one person. And I can only tell so many meaningful stories in my lifetime. And frankly, that's not going to be enough. The world has more fixing that needs doing than I can achieve myself. And that is a personal struggle that I've had for a while, because it makes me feel like I'm never going to be enough. But in some ways, it also motivates me to try to figure out, well, how can I be more then? How can I make a bigger impact? And I've spent a good chunk of my career trying to figure that out and immersing myself in storytelling projects that move the needle in some way. And a lot of the ones that I've worked on have, and I can feel good about that, but it's still not enough. And what I have come to realize is that it's really not about me. The answer to that drive to figure out how I can have a bigger impact really isn't about my impact at all. Because what I've realized is that it's not about the storytelling that I do or the stories that I tell. It's about the knowledge that I share. Because if I can empower somebody to become a more effective, a stronger storyteller, and they go off and tell more meaningful stories, but then they take it a step further and then encourage and empower someone else, then together, I think our impact can become exponential. And that's why it means so much to me to be here with you today. I think we together are a big part of that. And so thank you for that. And with that, I think we should go ahead and do it. I think we should start talking about story structure and see whether we can be better storytellers together as early as tomorrow. Okay, so let's start with the hero's journey. That term might sound familiar to a lot of you. First of all, it's mentioned quite a bit in the context of Hollywood. Most Hollywood movies follow a hero's journey sort of structure. But more and more people are starting to adopt that framework for corporate storytelling, even personal storytelling. And so here's what the hero's journey looks like. Most great hero's journeys start with a strong hook. And that hook is meant to make people go, whoa, I've got to pay attention. It's something to hook them so that they go, all right, you've got me for a few seconds. And once you've got them, then you have the opportunity to help them develop a relationship with your main character. And that's really important because they've got to feel that identification. They've got to see something of themselves in that character. They don't have to love them per se, but they do have to be able to relate to them and understand what they're striving for so that we can get on to the next part of the story, but also make them feel a certain level of personal investment into the character and then into the ensuing story. So once we've done the character development part, then comes a really important element of the story, which is conflict. And conflict is meant to really fuel the whole story from here on out, because there has to be something standing in the way of the main character achieving that goal that we set up at the beginning of the story. If they want to achieve something, but there's nothing standing in the way, and it's just easy to achieve, then you just kind of fast forward to them achieving it and the story's over. There's no additional reason to keep watching or keep listening or keep reading. Whereas the conflict really sets up an opportunity for the audience to feel a sense of curiosity. Now we might be asking ourselves, okay, will he or she, or won't he or she be able to achieve this thing that they're striving for? And that curiosity makes us as the audience lean in just a little bit more and pay some more attention. And what are they paying attention for? The journey. This is where really the bulk of the story begins. And it's our character going on kind of a quest to figure out how to achieve the goal that they're working towards. And that journey is not necessarily going to be a straight line. It's not just going to be, yes, did it. Chances are it's going to be a bob and weave sort of situation where you're going to have some successes, but also, some obstacles along the way. And it might be a one step back for two steps forward type of a situation. But that actually creates even more excitement for the story. The audience then becomes even more invested because that sense of suspense and curiosity is growing even more. Because now, while we're pointing to a potential solution, that journey isn't clear cut. And so you might be able to predict perhaps what might happen. There are still some unknowns. And so if it's done well, now the audience has put in enough time and enough energy and emotional investment, they have to stick around to see what happens. And that's really what leads us to the top of that triangle, which is the solution. It's kind of the answer to the question, will he or she, or won't he or she achieve the goal that they were working towards? And that solution doesn't necessarily need to be positive. It's not always going to be, yes, I did it. It could be, I totally failed, but here's what I learned from it. And so that's kind of the payoff. Whether it's positive or negative sometimes doesn't even really matter, as long as the message really comes across strongly. And then the last bit of the plot of this structure is that final punch. You really want to leave your audience with something that is memorable, that makes them go, wow, that was good, that makes them want to share it, or just makes them want to follow through with some sort of action. There are a few, I guess I want to call them mistakes, opportunities maybe left on the table that I see time and time again. And the first one is forgetting conflict. Because as we already discussed, conflict is kind of that fuel that leads to the journey. But for one reason or another, oftentimes in our storytelling, we just leave out the conflict part. And I see this a lot in corporate storytelling. A company really, really wants their product or service to be mentioned up front, right? Because they're thinking of that as the hero, but it's not. A person should be the hero. And so they start all these corporate videos with, here's our product, it's so awesome, or here's our service, it's so great, you should buy it. But then you see all of these like drop-off rates right in the middle of that corporate video. People are really engaged for the first minute or so, but then if all of the interesting and compelling information is presented right at the beginning and then all the rest of it is just kind of filler, then there's no incentive to keep watching. And so this argument that people have short attention spans online, I do think it's true to an extent, but I think these drop-off rates, we're not seeing them because people have short attention spans, because people can sit through a 90-minute movie. We're losing those people more likely because we haven't structured our stories well. And we've led with all the good stuff and haven't given people a reason to watch all the way through. And so that's one of the biggest reasons that I think that structure is really important. But again, leading with the character development and feeling that investment and then getting to the conflict. The conflict needs to be there in order for the journey and that suspense to be there. So remember to include conflict. That and hunger. The drive, the desire of the character. Think of it this way. If the character just kind of wants something, just sort of wants to achieve a goal, we can't expect our audiences to want something more than our main character does. Our character has to want it and has to want it bad. And there has to be a good reason for them wanting it too, right? It's got to have some depth to it. But more than anything, that character has to fight tooth and nail to achieve what they're striving for. Otherwise, we're not going to be invested in what they're trying to do as an audience. And so that's one other area that I think that we need to spend a little bit more emphasis on is really showing, and not just stating it, but really showing just how badly our characters want something. And I think lastly, but not least, when we're telling stories about ourselves, these are really important questions to be asking of ourselves as characters, as though we are living the journey of our lives. It sounds a little corny, but we are, right? We all have that hunger. We have a desire for something. We are working towards goals. We believe in things. And there are challenges in our way. There are obstacles. That's just how life works. But if we can be asking ourselves, what do we really want? What do I really want? How am I going to get it? What obstacles am I going to run into? Which of them matter? Which of them don't? What am I really trying to achieve? What are the potential solutions? I think that these are questions that we can be asking ourselves, not just so that we can tell our stories better, but maybe so we can live our stories a little bit better. And with all of that, I do honestly believe that keeping in mind the structure, the order, man, it has such great potential to take us to the next level when we're sharing the meaningful ideas that we are with the people that we care about. And so with all that said about structure, let me try this again. Knock, knock.
Who's there?
A little old lady.
Little old lady who?
I didn't know you could yodel.